that. You can use that.
I just got to say real quick, I'm sitting backstage. I officially have just turned in my man card because I was bawling like a baby. And I'm like, let's go. Is Curtis here? Oh, thank goodness Curtis is here, man. I'm so out of the man club now.
Well, it was your child, so you
That's
could.
right. That's true.
Yeah, you lived the personal pain. But well, the reason I wanted Sean to be my special guest is because he has a story of facing fear, and that's what we're talking about today, is facing fear. And so I wanted him to share the story with you. Okay, so I remember the day that you came to me, and we've been married quite a long time, about 11, 12 years, somewhere in there. And you know, you think that you know somebody by a decade of living with them. And Sean comes to me and he says, I want to skydive. And he said for stress relief. And I thought he was joking. And it turns out he was serious. So he had his whole life wanted to skydive. I had no idea about this. And so you began skydiving, and tell us kind of what you have to do to be a skydiver. You have to go through some stuff.
Well, the school that I went through, it's a static line program, and so what you do is you go in and you take an entire day course, and you learn how to skydive, which is kind of ridiculous because can you really learn how to skydive in one day? But you know, they assure me that you can. So you learn the basics, and you go through this entire course, and then what they do is they put you on what's called a static line, and you do your first jump. And so a static line is, like it sounds, it's a line and it's attached to another line, and you jump out and it automatically pulls your chute. And so that's how you learn the basics, and you go through this, and then you have to accomplish certain tasks as you go along, and your ultimate goal is to get to where you free fall. And that's what you go for, and then ultimately, they say, yeah, you can. We're pretty confident that you can jump out of a plane, and remember to pull your chute and not die, because we don't want that. And so, some people, it takes a lot more jumps on the static line than others, and but so that's just what you go through, and
okay.
That's kind of.
So you had been training for skydiving, and he was going out on Saturdays and Sundays, and I went and watched him one time, and that was enough for me. So I never went again. But I was very supportive, wasn't I?
Yes, you were. I was very shocked.
And, and so it was a beautiful Saturday.
Perfect.
Saturday day, perfect conditions for skydiving. And Sean went out with a couple of his buddies to go skydiving. And so this was your jump where you were... you had to pretend to pull your chute, so they knew you knew how to pull your chute.
Right.
You're still on the static line.
What you do is you're still on the static line, but you have to do what they call three dummy pulls, and you have to do the motions. And they've got a dummy flag rigged into your rig back here, and so you have to actually pull it out a certain way in a certain time, and they see it, and you have to do 3 of those perfectly. And so
and what number was this?
This was my last one. I basically did, if I did this right, then my next jump automatically that day would be my first free fall, because they always want you to do your first free fall on the same day.
Okay, so tell us what happened that day. You had you were on the static line, you jumped out, you pulled your flag, and what happened?
Well, I knew that I'd had a good pull, and so I was pretty excited, because I was like, finally, you know, I'm going to be doing my first free fall today. This is awesome. I'm so pumped. And so, you know, I did the pull, and my chute pulled out because I'm still on the static line, and so I'm sitting there and I'm just kind of, you know, admiring the beauty and just the wind and being up there. It's just awesome. And so I pulled my brakes, and that means you release your brakes and then you take control of the canopy. And when I did that, it didn't feel right, but I didn't really know what was going on, and so.
But there was a major problem, and your lines were twisted.
Right, and what had happened is, in my euphoria and excitement and just bliss of being at one with the wind, I had forgotten to check my chute before I pulled my brakes. And what you want to do when you're skydiving is before you take control of the canopy, you've got to make sure that your lines are all untangled, so that you can try and get them untangled before you have to also control the canopy or the chute. And so I had checked, like I'm trained to do, and they looked fine, but what I didn't check for is what's called a secondary line twist. And it's a little bit higher up, and it doesn't take much to check, but if I checked, I would have seen that I had a secondary line twist, and I probably could have corrected it. As it was, I didn't check that, and so when I pulled my brakes and took control of the canopy, I suddenly had control of the very out of control.
It's called the violent spin,
Yeah.
right? That's the term for it, and you've probably seen it on TV where the person's going around like this. So you had to actually cut your chute off,
Right.
and deploy
The reserve.
The
And here's the
reserve.
thing, every skydiver jumps with the pack that always has a reserve. That's federal regulations, and so you always have that reserve. But you don't ever want to really use that reserve, because if you use the reserve and that doesn't work, then, you know, well, it's a different kind of faith, you know. But I was freaking out because before I cut, I kept thinking to myself, I can get out of this. I'm trained to do this. I can do this. And also I'm hearing this English guy's voice in the back of my head who owns the company, the skydiving company. Oh, I don't know what you're doing, you damn yank. Oh, you didn't look. And it's like, I don't want to deal with Bob. I don't want to deal with English Bob. I don't want to have to pay him for his reserve either. So I can fix this. I can fix this. But what happens in a violent spin is you kind of are going like this, and it's kind of nice and pretty, and then it starts going faster, and it builds up momentum, and it goes faster and faster, and the circle gets tighter and tighter. And what happens is that chute is getting smaller and smaller because it's twisting. And what happened is I knew I was in trouble because I was like, now I'm getting dizzy, and I'm about to black out, and I'm like, I think I need to pull the reserve and just suck it up and deal with Bob.
So you had to cut off release the first chute before you can
Right.
deploy
So you have to pull one thing, which lets go of the chute, the bad chute, and then you have to pull another thing that lets go of, that opens the reserve. Here's the funny thing. Were you going to say?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, here's the funny thing. Now I'm stuck in a dilemma where I'm like, oh crap, which button's which? I couldn't remember. I was so freaking out. I was like, because if I pull the wrong one, if I pull the new chute, it's going to open up into the bad chute, and then well, you're looking for a new worship pastor.
Well, so obviously it ended okay, but the thing that I really admired about Sean, you know, he came home and told me this, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine if I was out there watching that. But he said, you know, I've got to get back out there. And he did. And I tell you, if that would have been me, that would have been my last jump. Like, I would have been like, okay, that's the end. But it's kind of like what the principal told John, you know, I want you to get back on the bike. And Sean went back on the parachute. And so I just thought that was like a super courageous story that, you know, that he would face that fear, because it shook him up. I mean, that could have been very, very disastrous. It shook Bob up too, who owned the parachute company.
He banned me from the place for 2 weeks while he could figure out what to do with me.
He was like, he's never lost one, you know, parachute.
I've never lost one before. I'm not going to lose one now.
But anyway, Sean, thank you so much for sharing